welcome. It's great to see you all. I'm especially grateful to Andrea Sorum, who provided that beautiful version of Ma Nish Tana, or the 4 questions for a prelude for us today, even though she couldn't be with us physically, so really appreciate that. So welcome. It's Passover right now. We're in the midst of this 8-day holiday. It started on Friday night and ends on Saturday night when it gets dark. I'm Margit Berman. I'm a program director in clinical psychology here at Augsburg, and I'm also Jewish, and really grateful to Pastor Schwen, Pastor Babette, for inviting me to come and share a little bit about my own faith and tradition in chapel today. And you really can't. Passover is not a holiday that takes place in church, obviously, but it's also not a holiday that takes place in the synagogue. It's a home holiday. It's a holiday we celebrate around our tables, right? So I really can't share Passover with you without inviting you to a Seder table, without inviting you sort of metaphorically into my home, into the home of Jewish people sort of everywhere. So I thought we would start, or I asked Rivka Buchbinder, who is a senior here at Augsburg and leads Hillel here at Augsburg, to co-host this imaginary Seder that I'd like to invite you to. And so she's going to start by sharing, again, virtually. She's with us sort of in spirit rather than in physical presence today. But she's going to take a minute to sort of set the Seder table for us by sharing about the Seder Plate, which would be at the center of any celebration of Passover we would have. So yeah, let's turn it over to Rivka.
Hi everyone, my name is Rivka and I am a senior here at Augsburg. I am an elementary education major with a minor in film and religion. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about Passover, specifically the Seder Plate that we use during the Seders. So the Seders were Friday night and Saturday night of this past week. And so there are 6 sections and each of them have its own item that goes into that space that represent something to do with the Passover story. Now, there are many different kinds of Seder plates. They come in all shapes and sizes, colors, decorations, designs. This is just the one that we are going to be using for this specific teaching. So one thing that you need to know is on our table during the Seder is we always have matzah. Now, during Passover, you eat a lot of matzah, like a lot of matzah. And so on the Seder, you're going to have 3 pieces of matzah stacked on top of each other, and those go in the center of the table. The next thing you're going to have is either grape juice or wine, and you're going to have 4 cups throughout the Seder. So in this case, I've got some sparkling grape juice, which is very fancy, and those also go on your side, and you're going to have the cups, and so you just refill them, and you refill them 4 times. On our Seder plate, we're going to start with the first item. So we're going to talk about this. This is much smaller than it was when I bought it because we used it for our Seders, and this is called, it's a horseradish, and it's called maror, or the bitter herb. And so it's not good, it's bitter, right? And so you are going to take a very, 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 like please, if you ever have this, very small section of this, and you're going to eat it to remind us of the bitter lives that the Jews had. And so it's supposed to make us sympathize and understand what they feel like through a physical sense, right? So when we eat it, we're supposed to just like be uncomfortable, and it's supposed to hurt, and it's not supposed to be enjoyable, just like the Jews did not enjoy their time when they were slaves, okay? And so what you do is you'll usually take a piece of matzah, usually you break it up, and you make a sandwich out of it. And so it kind of balances it out, but you still really want to get that effect of the bitter herb to remind us the fact that the Jews had these bitter lives. The next thing is there are 2 things that kind of are more symbolic that you just leave on the Seder plate that don't have anything to do with something that you eat. So this is the shank bone, and it's not the most pleasant thing to look at, but I'll just show it to you for demonstration purposes. So this is what it looks like. And this is supposed to be a part of the Korban Pesach. So Korban translates to offering. Pesach translates to Passover. So it's the Passover offering. And so this is what the Jews would do. They would go to the Holy Temple and they would give an offering to God. And so this goes symbolically on the Seder plate. This is just left here. And then also, I mean, in some families, people do something with it. My family, we just leave it on the Seder plate. You also have a hard-boiled egg. And this was another part of the Korban Pesach, or the Passover offering, that the Jews would do. And they would make a display of having these 2 things. So these 2 things on the Seder plate are symbolic. The next thing we have is, in this bag, I've got some chopped up apples, and it's not exactly the texture that it's supposed to be because I handmade this. And so it's slices of apple, and you add honey, grape juice, cinnamon, salt, lemon. Some people add walnuts, and you're supposed to like finely mash it so that way it kind of resembles the paste or the mortar that the Jews use to make the pyramids. So it was what they used to build the building bricks of the pyramid. And so this you keep on your Seder plate. We'll put some here. We'll move this here so you can see kind of what it looks like. There we go. And so during the Seder, when we make our sandwich with our maror, we take a little bit of the charoset and we put it on our sandwich. Some families shake it off to kind of be like, we're getting rid of the actual physical work, but we're going to keep in mind of like what it felt like. So some people decide to take away kind of like the action or like the correlation to the work, but keep the memory and keep that bitterness with us while we eat the sandwich. Next thing we have is we take water and we fill up a cup and we add salt water. We add salt to it to make it salt water. And so what this is supposed to symbolize is the tears that the Jews were constantly crying as they did the hard work. Now, if you've ever eaten your tears or gotten your tears in your mouth, you can tell that they're salty and they're salty, right? And so that's what this is supposed to represent. Then we take the celery or lettuce or whatever vegetables. So then you dip it into the salt water and you eat it to taste the salty tears, to remind you of the tears that the Jews cried when they were in Egypt. So that goes here and this goes here. Now, throughout the Seder, you're going to be taking from pieces of this. Some of it is symbolic, some of it you actually are going to use when you do certain actions in the Seder. And this is always in the center of the table. And then throughout the Seder, they'll talk about the different items. So they'll say, like, maror, what is maror? And everyone at the table will point and, like, they'll say, okay, so the maror is the bitter herb. And this is supposed to symbolize the bitter lives that the Jews had. Now, to wish someone a happy Passover, you can say Chag Pesach Sameach, which is Chag is holiday, Pesach is Passover, and Sameach means happy. So you're basically saying happy holidays, Passover. So it's like happy Passover, and it's kind of correlating to the acknowledgement that it's this holy holiday, this special holiday, and it's the holiday of Passover. So Chag Pesach Sameach, and thank you for taking a moment and listening to me explain the Seder plate. Bye.
Thank you so much to Rivka for doing that for us. And so now you're metaphorically welcomed to our Passover celebration. And I'm going to invite Pastor Schwen up to share with us a little bit of Bible, a little bit of reading to sort of put us in the right mood for today.
Thank you, Margit. This reading comes from Exodus chapter 1 into chapter 2 as well. The king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, saying, "When you deliver the Hebrew women, look at the birth stool. If it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live." The midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. So the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing, letting the boys live?" The midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have already given birth." And God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and increased greatly. And God established households for the midwives because they feared God. Then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, "Every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile, but let every girl live." Now a certain member of the house of Levi went and took into his household as his wife a woman of Levi. The woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw how beautiful he was, she hid him for 3 months. When she could hide him no longer, she got a wicker basket for him and caulked it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child into it and placed it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. And his sister stationed herself at a distance to learn what would befall him. The daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile, while her maidens walked along the Nile. She spied the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to fetch it. When she opened it, she saw that it was a child, a boy, crying. She took pity on it and said, "This must be a Hebrew child." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get you a Hebrew nurse to suckle the child for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter answered, "Yes." So the girl went and called the child's mother. And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child and nurse it for me, and I will pay your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed it. When the child grew up, she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, who made him her son. She named him Moses, explaining, "I drew him out of the water."
Thank you so much for sharing that. Passover is a holiday that asks something of us. It asks, how shall we become free? And it also asks, how shall we become just? And what I love about this story is that it's a holiday that brings us into this incredible myth of resistance, of uprising, of liberation, in a time that I think is very relevant to us in the sense that it is a time of misused power, of oppression, of an endless series of monumental challenges, an endless series of plagues. There are 10 plagues in the story of Exodus that folks face, including some of the plagues we're dealing with now, disease and death. And so it's relevant to our times, here's what I'm saying. My rabbi, Dove Taylor, likes to point out that there's actually little to no archaeological evidence that the story that's laid out in Exodus, the Passover story, ever actually happened as a historical event. What do we make of that? What I love about what he says is the Bible isn't true because it happened. It's not true because of historical facts. The Bible is true because it happens all the time. And that's kind of what I have in mind when I listen to this story. How do we become free? How do we become just as we face these plagues, as we face misused power and oppression now? There are urgent ethical questions that it asks us. How do we resist oppression? How do we create justice? How do we create a promised land for ourselves right here in this moment? The scripture reading that I asked Pastor Schwen to share with you today is at the very beginning of the Passover story. Pharaoh is alarmed by the Hebrew people's very existence. Just their existence is an affront to him. And he's engaged in a systematic, long-term campaign of oppression, of reproductive control and controlling women in the story, and of genocide. Something I think we're dealing with, the threat of war, sort of all the things we're facing right now. And he makes this ruling that Hebrew sons should be killed, should be thrown into the Nile. But right alongside the horror and the trauma of that institutionalized oppression is this endless resistance and uprising and self-liberation and liberation of others and allyship and accomplice behavior that you can kind of see right in the story. The women in this story are activists. They are organized. They have a system. So first you see the Hebrew midwives that are sort of secretly defying Pharaoh's order to kill the infants at the births they attend. And, they're willing to use deception. They're willing to show up at these births and defy the unethical, immoral orders that they've been given. But that doesn't work, right? Pharaoh continues his campaign of genocide. And when that happens, we see Moses' mother carefully preparing this basket for him, right? She waterproofs it. She used bitumen and pitch to make this safe vessel for him to ride in. She sends his sister, Miriam, down the river with him to watch. Why is she doing that, right? In one way, it doesn't make any sense at all. Why is she preparing a vessel so carefully or sending his sister after a certain death for this baby? Why would she expose her daughter to the trauma of watching her brother drowned? Well, it's because she knows, right? She knows about this system. She knows that it's not just the Hebrews who are fighting oppression in this terrible time. Pharaoh's own daughter is an ally, is an accomplice in this story who's subverting the genocidal campaign. These ancient women, including oppressed women, but also very, very privileged women, women who are living in palaces, have a plan to stop the violence. Pharaoh's daughter pulls this baby out of the Nile, doesn't know who the baby is, but she knows it's a Hebrew baby. She says right in the story that she knows that. And here's Miriam. What is this child doing here? Where did you turn up from, right? How did this happen? She accepts Miriam's offer to go find a Hebrew wet nurse. Also doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm guessing that the Egyptian palace had some wet nurses on staff that Pharaoh's daughter could have used. But no, she knows what this child is doing here. It's part of the system. It's part of the organized resistance that they have going in this genocidal environment. And she purposely invites Miriam to bring Moses' own mother to come and raise this baby and to have wages while she does so. She does it on purpose. It's not an accident. Moses' mother packed her baby for the river because Egyptian and Hebrew women had banded together to hide kids, right? Because they cared about children more than they cared about this system of genocide and oppression that they were all together living under. And they were doing this, including Pharaoh's own daughter, in secret, at great personal risk. They were doing what caring people have always done in the face of evil, oppression, genocide. And so when we tell the Passover story, our rabbis say, speak as though you were with Moses, as though you personally were led from Egypt. But it isn't as though, it's now. Every generation has slave masters, genocide mongers, racist oppressors, plagues. We have these, we have to resist these even now. And so the Passover story calls us to consider whether we have privilege, because all of us in this room bear at least some privilege, whether we experience oppression, because I would bet that many of us in this room experience oppression. Regardless, the question's the same. How can we rise up against injustice? How can we band together in favor of love, of caring? Later in the story, Pharaoh is still resisting freedom. Pharaohs be pharaohing everywhere, right? So God rains down 10 plagues on the Egyptians. And the reason that the Bible gives for God doing that is, first of all, to force Pharaoh to release the Hebrew people and allow them to go free, but also to demonstrate his power. It's a really difficult part of the story. Who made this God in the image of Pharaoh, this God who has to make people suffer to demonstrate his power? Why are these plagues still with us in this very literal, direct way? Last year on Twitter, I actually read something that local rabbi Michael Adam Latz shared that actually helped me make sense of this really difficult part of the story. So I'm going to share it with you and read what he had to say. So this is, like I said, Michael Adam Latz's words. The 10 plagues in the Hebrew Bible's Exodus were as much to challenge the Egyptians and the Pharaoh as they were to show the Israelites that we had the power and endurance. The plagues helped the Israelite slaves build the requisite faith and the spiritual muscles to resist tyranny. We build faith step by step, story by story, person by person. Those 10 plagues were the original politics of disruption, humanity's boldest wake-up call. You beat these slaves, we're going to ruin your water. You overwork these people, we're going to wreck your crops. You won't pay them, we're going to block your roads. You won't free them, we're going to turn off the lights. You deny people their basic human dignity, we are coming. And after 10 plagues, Pharaoh's hardened heart finally shattered, and our people marched to freedom. Why? Because enslaving people, discriminating against people, denying people their innate dignity is such a profound theological affront to God that business as usual just isn't possible. This is personal. Human dignity is our ultimate theological concern. When that means interrupting business as usual to break chains of bondage, then it is both our religious inheritance and our moral obligation to rise up against the tyranny that prevents all people from being fully human. Isn't that beautiful what he had to share? I really found it moving. I'd like to invite you today, as we sort of close out the part where I share with you, to take just 1 minute of silent meditation. I'm going to stop talking and give us a minute to breathe. And I want you to consider during that time how you can be part of a politics of disruption, how you can band together with other people to resist oppression and raise up love. So let's take just a moment to reflect on that. Thank you so much for taking that time. I think we're maybe just a little over time, so I'm just going to take 1 minute and share one last Passover tradition with you, and that's a tradition of gratitude. There's a song we sing at every Passover Seder called Dayenu, and Dayenu means it would have been enough. And the idea is that God has given us so many gifts. Really, any one of them would have been enough, right? If we just had food and water and shelter, that would have been enough. But no, God also sees fit to give us friendship, to give us community, to give us the opportunity to get educations together. All of these amazing gifts. And Dayenu, any one of them would have been enough. And so we have a song for that. And I was hoping you would join me in singing Dayenu. It's a very easy song. It's the easiest Hebrew you're ever going to learn, for sure. And if you didn't know any before, you can say you learned a little Hebrew today. And I'm going to walk away from the mic just so that I think I forgot to think I did the mic for me. So I'm just going to step away from it. But the words are in your bulletin, but even if you don't have them, I'm going to sing a line and have you sing a line back to me. I'm going to sing one verse and a chorus. So we're just going to stop. All right, so here's the first line of the first verse. Ilu hotzi hotzi anu. All right, turn. See, now it's in your head, right? Die, die, ain't who, die, die, ain't who, die,